Partly call me a Mongo. I didn't know I'd be a Mongo before I came here, but a Mongo without perhaps the emotion that some Mongos have. I'll explain who I am and how we got here. By background, as Sarah said, I'm a European lawyer and trade lawyer, and I was a lawyer in the first World Trade Organization court case involving the ACP countries and the famous banana dispute. Before that, I worked with FIFES when they were going to establish a base in Honduras to produce bananas. And they got a rather unfriendly welcome from the US companies there, and a mediation arbitration was set up by the government to try and resolve the dispute. And I was involved in that. And I remember very well the Deputy Minister of Finance at the time saying to me that this arrival of FIFES was probably the most important historic event for Honduras. And that lasted with me. That really, I suppose, created a seed in my mind that is still there, that trade has a huge impact on poverty. And following that, I was lecturing in UCD on trade law, and I began to do some research into, is the answer to poverty simply the eradication of changing the rules of the World Trade Organization to allow agricultural products and other products to move freely and to remove the subsidies? And whilst yes, if you look at products like cotton and the US subsidies of cotton, there's no doubt from the research anybody would do that the impact of those trade subsidies in countries like Burkina Faso, or Mali, I think, and Burkina Faso, are enormous. But to simply dismantle the CAP or change the WTO rules, most economists now, I think from the research I was doing, would realise that that is not actually going to be developing aid. The beneficiaries may be New Zealand and Brazil and other countries that are well up in the scale. And what was becoming obvious from the time when the WTO was created and a lot of academic papers being written about the poverty and trade issue was that the core to the issue was capacity. So developing from that, we looked at the issue, how would you try to cure this gap? And if you take a textile manufacturer abroad, the realization became obvious that for them to succeed in creating any kind of sustainable development, they needed a whole set of skills. They needed good roads to get their product to market. If there's a flood, as we know only too well in the Midlands of Ireland, and your roads are destroyed, you won't get your product to market. Of course, they need extremely good lawyers, as we all do, fundamentally, to any element of society. They needed good accountants. But very soon you realise that for society to function, to get to economic development, they need the yellow pages to begin to function. And so in some respects I was part of the genesis for the creation of Connect Ethiopia. We also realised that Ireland was a relatively small country, and that to try and change the world, and we certainly had and still have ambitions to change the world, but it was unlikely that Ireland could change all of Africa in one fell swoop. So we decided to break it up into bite sizes. And we looked at one country, Ethiopia, which I'll turn to in a moment to explain why, and that we thought was a country we could work with. So that's more or less our history. I'll try to be fast because I know we want to get into a dialogue and get into back and forth discussion. So that's our history, founded to do those objectives, connect Irish businesses, and the reason we also chose one country is that we want to achieve maximum leverage for people that work with us. A bit like Andrew, our concept of the yellow pages, we can take in anybody, whether you're a plumber or a photographer or a banker. Well, we have worked with bankers, maybe we should get the Ethiopian bankers back to give us a hand over here, perhaps. But we can take any part of the structure we have here and use them to try and enhance the capacity abroad. Focus on one country also allows us to benefit, and we've already seen that, from synergies within Ireland. So everybody in this room knows a vast number of people in Ireland. So if we have a problem in Ethiopia and we can begin to connect other people in Ireland to solve that problem, that makes our time much more efficient. And I suppose because we are busy people, I'm a lawyer and Aidan's a businessman, we want to make sure that our time delivers the maximum result. So leverage is fundamental to what we're trying to do, and as I say, build capacity. Why Ethiopia? They were the various criteria that we found were very important. The last one we found subsequently, which I'd say is a major factor. We had a superb ambassador in Dr. Rita Areas, and a superb ambassador in Addis as well. One of the other criteria that helped us move towards Ethiopia was that it was clearly identifiable with emotional ties. Everybody in Ireland could identify with Ethiopia. They knew of Bob Geldof, they knew of Live Aid, they knew of the famine. And that appeared to us at the time to be a significant advantage. But in fact, that's the point I'd like to raise for this conference, because I think that in fact becomes one of our biggest problems. When Connect Ethiopia had a meeting of all the, not all, but a large number of the Ethiopian diaspora in Ireland, to talk to them about our project, to get their support, and to find out what annoyed them most about charities and other activities. The issue they raised, and one we'd already been conscious of, was the image that charities, some of whom maybe like you, portray of developing countries. And for someone in my position who wants to develop tourism, textiles, other exports, there's this dilemma that I realize we all face, where you need to release the coins to do extremely valuable charitable work, and the images you present of the country does help to release the coins. My particular project is not a very emotional project. We're trying to create business and capacity, and therefore it's less attractive. But I also see that the images that we'll release for other types of charity do harm to me getting their textiles in Clearys, where they were, and other shops. Tourism, as Sarah mentioned, for the private initiatives, tourism is a phenomenal creator of wealth and knowledge, but tourism is massively hindered by the image that charities can present. So it's a point that I think is probably one, if we can find a solution to that, because I do see the dilemma. I do see that charities do hugely beneficial work and they need to get funds for it, and that is an issue. So what do? We sectoral twinning, and there's an example of some of the issues we do, Law Society, Engineers Ireland. I would say it's somewhat mundane stuff and it's somewhat less emotional. I will certainly say that when I went to Ethiopia and spent some time working with gold was to me vastly more satisfying in some respect and emotional, certainly, in terms of the immediate kick of the reward. But I have to balance that out against what I know intellectually creates the greatest leverage, and we believe addresses the causes of poverty rather than the symptoms. And that, I suppose, is what our main push is. Key projects. A sample of some of our projects. A rule of law project. We brought over a considerable number of lawyers on a number of occasions to give training to the prosecutors, the judiciary, the Human Rights Commission on gender-based violence, human rights, court processes. To me as a lawyer, very important because it begins to aim at the structure of society and the stability of society. Ironically, we're probably not going to do that much of that again. The reception is probably not as good as we'd like in that particular area. But we also provided seminars on very exciting topics that I'm sure you're all very involved in, which is intellectual property, construction law, public procurement, arbitration, conciliation. So much more mundane areas, but an area where clearly we were meeting a need. There was huge hunger, huge attendances, huge take-up, and huge appreciation for particular lectures, and in a way we were probably fulfilling a role that wasn't being fulfilled by some of the other NGOs. Another one I'll pick up just very briefly is textiles. We are working with both small SME producers with phenomenal talent, and in a way that's the kind of image I would like to see portrayed of Ethiopia, which is a dynamic, exciting country with very talented people. And there's this dilemma that we face as to the image that is in the minds of the people that are behind us out in the population of Ireland. Very talented, very hungry to know about marketing, but know very little about marketing in fact. And we can help them in terms of design. We've got Liz Quinn working with us, and we've got Conor from Paul Costa to work with us, help with their design and help them break into a new market. And we're also looking at more mass-produced, and have a meeting next week with a major European multinational, which if we, after 2 years of working with this one, if we can break into this one, we will be supplying Ethiopian cotton product throughout Europe. And that will produce a huge number of jobs, mainly women, and I have to confess, unlike Ireland, in Ethiopia the women are vastly better than the men. The reverse is in Ireland. But they do tend to manage their money better, and the benefit for creating employment among women is really hugely